An Apache woman arrived on a stormy night. "I need shelter," she told the widowed rancher. The wind howled through the empty plains, rattling the wooden shutters of the small ranch house. Rain pelted the roof like a drum, and the dark clouds above seemed to swallow the night whole. Ethan McCall, a man in his late 40s, stood by the window, staring out at the storm. He had lived on this ranch for nearly 20 years, long enough to know the moods of the weather and the unforgiving nature of the land. But tonight felt different. The storm was stronger than any he had seen in years, and an uneasy feeling gnawed at his chest. Ethan was a widower. His wife Clara had passed away 5 years ago, leaving him with only memories and the solitude of the ranch. He had grown used to the silence, to the slow rhythm of life that only he and the wind shared. The cattle were secure in the barn, the horses huddled together in their stalls, and the fire in the hearth crackled gently, offering the only warmth against the chill that crept through the house. As he moved to stoke the fire, there was a sudden knock at the door. Ethan froze. Knocks were rare here. In this isolated part of New Mexico, strangers were even rarer. He peered through the small window in the door, squinting through the sheets of rain. At first he saw nothing but the darkness. Then, for a brief moment, he saw a figure cloaked in wet, dark clothing, standing at the edge of the porch. Another knock came, louder this time. Ethan's heart thumped. Who could be out there in this storm? He grabbed his worn coat and opened the door just a crack. Standing there was a woman. She was soaked from head to toe, her hair plastered to her face and shoulders, and her eyes wide with both fear and determination. Her clothing was simple but strong, showing signs of wear from a life spent outdoors. She held herself with a quiet dignity that made Ethan pause. I need shelter," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "Please." "I have nowhere else to go tonight." Ethan studied her. Something about her presence felt unusual, yet not threatening. He could see that she had traveled far. Her boots were caked in mud, and her arms bore faint scratches, as if the land itself had tested her. He didn't know her, he didn't know her story, but he couldn't leave her out in this storm. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside. "Quickly, you'll catch your death out there." She nodded once, and he watched as she stepped inside, dripping water across the old wooden floor. Ethan grabbed a rough towel from a hook by the door and handed it to her. She accepted it with a grateful nod, and as she began to dry herself, Ethan noticed the subtle way she observed the house, the way she noticed the simplicity of the furniture, the warmth of the fire, and even the small framed photograph of Clara on the mantel. "I'm Ethan McCall," he said, offering his hand, though he knew she might not take it. "You can stay here tonight." "You'll be safe. I'm Island," she replied softly, taking his hand briefly before letting it go. There was something in her voice, a calm strength, that made him feel like she had survived more storms than he could imagine. They moved to the kitchen, where Ethan poured hot water into 2 mugs. The smell of the coffee filled the room, mingling with the earthy scent of rain and wood smoke. Island accepted a mug with both hands, inhaling the warmth before taking a careful sip. Ethan sat opposite her, his eyes studying her quietly, while she did the same, as if weighing him, trying to understand who this man was who had opened his door to a stranger. The wind continued to batter the house, rattling the windows and whistling through the gaps in the walls. Outside, the storm seemed endless, a wild force that made the world beyond the ranch appear dangerous and untamed. Inside, however, there was a fragile sense of safety, built on trust that had been offered and accepted without words. For a long while, neither spoke. Ethan's mind wandered to memories of his wife. Clara had loved storms. She would have danced in the rain without a second thought, laughing and calling out to the wind. But this storm, he realized, was different. It wasn't playful or joyful. It was raw and powerful, and yet it had brought someone to his door, someone who needed him. Finally, Eileen broke the silence.
I didn't expect to find anyone here, she said.
This place, it's so quiet. Ethan nodded. Most people don't live out here.
It's lonely, but it's safe, most of the time. You're the first stranger I've had in years.
Can I ask what brings you out in a storm like this? She hesitated, her eyes looking into the fire rather than at him. I was traveling. I had no choice but to come this way. The storm. It forced me to stop. I didn't want to risk getting lost in the night. Ethan could sense that there was more to her story, though he didn't press. Some stories revealed themselves slowly, in time, when trust was earned. For now, it was enough that she was here, alive and unharmed. They talked in small bursts after that, sharing stories of the land and its dangers. Ethan told her about the ranch, the cattle, and the work that filled his days. Eileen spoke of her travels, of the deserts and rivers she had crossed, and of the strength it took to survive on her own. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Two people, alone in the world, finding solace in the presence of another. Hours passed, and the storm outside showed no sign of easing. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. Ethan felt a strange sense of connection, as if the storm itself had brought Aelin to him for a reason beyond simple coincidence. Eventually, the fire began to die down, and both of them felt the weariness of the long night. Ethan showed her the guest room, a small space with a narrow bed and clean sheets. Eileen thanked him, a soft smile touching her lips, and laid down, finally allowing herself to rest after the long journey. Ethan returned to his chair by the fire, watching the rain streak the windows. The house was silent now, except for the occasional creak of the wood and the steady pulse of the storm outside. He thought about the unusual events of the night, the way a single knock on the door had changed the quiet rhythm of his life. Though he didn't yet understand her story, he knew one thing. The arrival of the Apache woman on this stormy night was more than chance. And as the wind moaned through the prairie and the rain hammered the roof, Ethan realized that the night was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge both of them in ways they could not yet imagine. Sleep eventually claimed him, but not before he glanced toward the small guest room. In the dim light, he could see the shape of Eileen resting peacefully, and for the first time in many years, he felt a sense of hope. The storm had brought her to his doorstep, and with her arrival came a quiet, unspoken promise of change, of life renewed, and of stories yet to be shared. And so, the storm raged on outside, but inside the small ranch house, a fragile warmth had taken root. Two strangers, bound by fate and circumstance, had found a moment of safety, a moment of trust, and perhaps the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Morning arrived slowly on the McCall ranch, the storm having left behind a world washed clean. The sun broke through the clouds in soft streaks of light, glinting off puddles in the yard and casting long shadows across the rolling plains. Ethan stirred from his sleep, rubbing his eyes as he listened to the quiet hum of the morning. The storm had passed, but the memory of the wind, the rain, and the knock on his door lingered like an echo. He stepped into the kitchen, still in his worn coat, and found Aelin already awake. She stood by the window, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes fixed on the horizon. There was a calmness in her posture, a quiet strength that Ethan had noticed from the moment she entered the house. She didn't speak immediately, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a shared acknowledgement of the long night they had survived together. "Morning," Ethan said softly, trying not to startle her. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the room. "Sleep well?" Eileen turned her gaze toward him and gave a small nod. "I did. Thank you for letting me stay. I haven't rested properly in days." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning behind her words. Life on the road, especially during a storm, was exhausting. The open plains offered freedom, but they also held dangers that few outsiders could understand. He gestured toward the table. "Sit. I'll make breakfast. You must be hungry." Eileen moved to the table and took a seat. Ethan busied himself with the stove, cracking eggs and frying them alongside strips of bacon. The smell filled the small kitchen, and Eileen watched quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of warm water. She seemed both cautious and curious, her eyes flicking occasionally toward Ethan, as if studying the man who had offered her shelter without hesitation. "I usually eat alone," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Clara used to join me, but, well, it's been just me for a long time now." His voice softened, carrying the weight of memory. "It's strange to have someone else here, but it's not unpleasant." Aylin offered a gentle smile. "I understand. Being alone can be comforting, but it can also be heavy. Traveling by myself, I've grown used to solitude, but sometimes you wish for a friendly voice, even if just for a moment." Ethan nodded, feeling an unexpected connection forming. The simplicity of her words and the way she spoke them with honesty made him feel that the world was not entirely empty, even in the vastness of the plains. They ate together in a quiet rhythm, the clinking of utensils and the occasional sip of coffee punctuating their conversation. Aylin shared small details of her journey, the long stretches of desert, the nights spent under the stars, and the kindness of strangers she had met along the way. Ethan listened, fascinated. He had lived on this land for years, but hearing her perspective reminded him of its beauty and its dangers in ways he had forgotten. After breakfast, Ethan suggested they step outside. The storm had left the air fresh and clean, and the sun warmed the damp earth. Puddles reflected the blue sky, and birds cautiously returned to the fields, their songs timid at first but growing stronger as the morning progressed. Eileen walked beside Ethan, careful not to slip on the wet grass. "This place," she said, pausing to take in the view. "It's quiet, but there's life here too. You can feel it in the air, even after the storm." Ethan smiled faintly. "Most people think nothing lives out here but dust and wind. They don't see the way the land survives, how it provides for those who know it. It can be harsh, but it can also be forgiving." Aylin nodded, as if agreeing with a thought she had long held. "I've seen harsh places too," she said, "but survival, it teaches you to notice the small things. The sky, the wind, the way the earth smells after rain. You learn to be aware, to respect it." They walked toward the barn, where the cattle and horses had begun to stir. Ethan showed her how he fed the animals, the care he took in ensuring they were safe and healthy. Aylin watched intently, her hands brushing against the fence as she moved, absorbing every detail. She asked questions about the work, about the routines, and Ethan found himself explaining things he had never thought to share with anyone.
"You do all this by yourself?" she asked, impressed.
"It's what I know. The land doesn't wait for anyone. You keep up, or it reminds you that it doesn't care about your plans." Eileen nodded, a shadow crossing her face for a moment. "I understand that feeling," she said quietly. "Life doesn't pause for anyone. Sometimes you just have to keep moving, even if it's hard." As the morning passed, the two of them grew more comfortable in each other's presence. The initial caution that had marked their interaction softened into something resembling companionship. There was an unspoken understanding that neither needed to explain everything immediately, that trust could be built slowly, like the careful planting of seeds in fertile soil.
Later, as they returned to the house, Ethan noticed subtle signs of Aylin's past.
Her clothes, though simple, were practical and durable, suited for someone who had spent time outdoors. There were faint scars on her hands and forearms, evidence of survival and resilience. He didn't ask about them, not yet, but he recognized the strength in her posture, the way she moved with awareness and caution. "I should tell you," Aylin began hesitantly as they reached the porch, "I've been traveling for reasons I haven't shared. Some are complicated, but I promise I mean no harm here. I only needed shelter from the storm." Ethan looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I believe you," he said.
"You don't have to tell me everything now."
"Just know that this place is safe. As long as you stay here, no one can hurt you." She nodded, and for the first time a faint smile appeared on her lips. It was small, but it carried a sense of relief, as if being believed and protected was a rare gift she hadn't expected. The day continued with small tasks. Ethan repaired a broken fence while Aylin assisted, learning quickly how to handle the tools. They worked side by side, sharing occasional conversation and quiet laughter when mistakes were made. For Ethan, it was a reminder of a time long past when the house had been filled with life and the work had been shared. For Aylin, it was a rare moment of calm, a place where she could rest from constant vigilance. As afternoon approached, a gentle breeze swept through the plains, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant pine. Aylin paused for a moment, closing her eyes and letting the wind brush against her face. "It feels peaceful here," she said softly, "like the world has stopped for a while, just enough to breathe." Ethan glanced at her, noticing the fleeting softness in her expression. "That's what I love about this land," he said. "It's not always kind, but it gives you moments like this if you're willing to notice." Evening approached, and the sun began to sink behind the distant hills. Shadows stretched across the ranch, painting the land in shades of gold and amber. Aylin and Ethan sat on the porch, sipping the last of the coffee from the morning, watching the sky change colors. There was a quiet understanding between them now. The storm of the previous night had forced them together, and the day had allowed them to begin bridging the distance between two very different lives. They hadn't spoken of the future, nor had they needed to. The present was enough, an unspoken agreement that for this one day they had found companionship, safety, and trust. Before heading inside, Ethan finally broke the comfortable silence. "I don't know what brought you here, Aylin," he said, "but I'm glad you came. Strange as it may be, having you here, it feels right. Even after all these years, I've forgotten what it's like to share the day with someone." Aylin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "I didn't expect to find a place like this," she said. "A home, even if just for a day. But I feel it too. Sometimes the world surprises you when you least expect it." As night fell, the two of them prepared for rest once again. The storm had passed, but the bond that had formed in its aftermath was only beginning. Inside the small ranch house, there was warmth, there was understanding, and there was the quiet hope that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, two lonely souls had found something worth holding on to. Outside, the plains lay quiet under the watchful stars. Inside, Aylin and Ethan slept in separate rooms, but the silence of the house was no longer empty. It was filled with the unspoken connection between them, a connection that promised to grow as days passed, as stories were shared, and as trust deepened. And in the calm of the night, with only the distant howl of a lone coyote to remind them of the wild world beyond. Both Island and Ethan dreamed of what might come next, knowing that the day had changed them, and the storm had only been the beginning of their story. The next morning the ranch was quiet again, but there was a different energy in the air. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean, but inside the house, a new tension lingered. Ethan went about his usual morning chores, feeding the animals and checking fences, but he found his thoughts drifting toward Island. Her presence was no longer just a guest staying for a night. She had become a part of his daily routine, and with that came questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Island, meanwhile, moved silently through the house. She made herself useful without being asked, sweeping the floors and tending to small tasks in the kitchen. Her movements were careful and precise, as if she had learned long ago that every action mattered. But beneath the calm exterior, there was a wariness that Ethan could sense, though he didn't yet understand. "Ethan," she said quietly, breaking the morning silence.
"Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, pausing as he brushed sawdust from his hands. I
need to tell you a little about why I was traveling," she began, her voice steady but carrying a weight of caution. "There are people from my past who don't mean well. Well, I ran from them to survive. That's why I ended up here, at your door." Ethan stopped, feeling the shift in the air. He had sensed there was more to her journey than she had shared, but hearing it confirmed brought a new layer of concern. "I see," he said carefully. "You don't have to tell me everything now. I just want you to be safe." Island nodded, looking down at her hands. "I will be, as long as I stay here. But you should know, I didn't come here by accident. I think, somehow, I was meant to find this place." Ethan raised an eyebrow, both intrigued and cautious. "Meant to find this place? You believe in fate?" She shrugged lightly, a faint smile touching her lips. "Sometimes the world pushes you to the right place at the right time. Sometimes you don't understand why until much later." The conversation left Ethan thoughtful as they stepped outside. The sun was higher now, bright and warm, drying the damp earth and glinting off puddles left from the storm. The ranch looked peaceful, almost untouched by the chaos of the previous night. But Ethan knew better. The plains could be as unforgiving as they were beautiful. Island followed him to the barn, where he began inspecting the fences and checking the water troughs. She watched quietly for a moment, then spoke again. "You handle all of this alone?" she asked, gesturing to the wide expanse of the ranch and the animals scattered across the fields. Ethan nodded. "It's a lot of work, but it's manageable. This land has been in my family for generations. You get used to it, or you don't last long." Island's eyes studied the land, as if memorizing every detail. "It reminds me of where I grew up. Not the same, but similar. Open spaces, the sky stretching forever, and the constant need to pay attention. You can't ignore the world around you, or it will take advantage." Ethan felt a flicker of recognition in her words. There was wisdom there, shaped by experience and survival. He didn't know the specifics of her past, but he could sense that she had faced hardships few could imagine. As they worked, Ethan noticed small things, how Aylin moved with careful precision, how her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, and how she instinctively reacted to the animal's movements. She was strong, but she was also alert, always aware of possible dangers. It was clear that her journey had taught her to be cautious and to survive at all costs. Later in the day, after the work in the barn was done, they returned to the house. Aylin prepared a simple lunch while Ethan washed up, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. She told him about some of the landscapes she had seen, the rivers that sparkled like silver, and the mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Ethan shared stories of life on the ranch, of the storms, the long days of planting and harvesting, and the quiet moments he had spent alone since Clara passed away. But despite the lighter tone, the shadow of her past remained. Aelin spoke cautiously, never revealing too much, but enough to suggest that danger was never far behind her. Ethan felt a growing sense of responsibility. He had always lived for himself, but now he realized that someone else's safety rested in his hands, and the thought both frightened and strengthened him. As the afternoon sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the land, Aelin suggested a walk. They moved toward the edge of the property, where the plains stretched endlessly, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage and earth. "Do you ever feel like the land has its own story?" Aelin asked, pausing to look at the horizon.
Ethan thought for a moment. "Yes," he said slowly.
"Every hill, every tree, every river, it remembers. It remembers the people who lived here, the storms that passed, the moments of joy and loss. You just have to listen." Aelin smiled softly. "I try to listen too. The land teaches you, if you pay attention. It tells you when to move, when to rest, and when to be cautious." They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the gentle rustle of grass in the breeze. The tranquility of the moment contrasted sharply with the storm that had brought Aelin to the ranch, but it also highlighted the fragility of peace. Ethan knew that this calm could not last forever, and he could see that Aelin carried the weight of that knowledge with her. When they returned to the house, the sky had turned shades of pink and gold, signaling the approach of evening. Ethan lit the fire again, and the warmth filled the room as Aelin prepared a simple dinner. They ate quietly, both lost in thought, both aware that their time together was shaping a new reality neither had anticipated. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Aelin finally shared a bit more of her story. She spoke of the people she had fled, of the conflicts that had forced her to leave her home, and of the journey that had brought her to Ethan's ranch. She did not go into detail, but the fragments she shared were enough to reveal a life of courage, resilience, and determination. Ethan listened, not interrupting, offering only nods and quiet acknowledgement. He did not need every detail to understand the danger she had faced and the strength she possessed. The more she spoke, the more he realized that she was not just a guest. She was a survivor, someone who had faced hardships and lived to tell the story. As the night deepened, the fire crackled and the shadows danced on the walls. Outside, the plains were quiet, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, Aelin and Ethan shared a rare moment of understanding. Words were no longer necessary. The presence of one another conveyed trust, respect, and a fragile sense of safety. Before heading to bed, Ethan spoke softly. "You've been through a lot, Aelin." "I can see that, but you're safe here." "I'll make sure of it." Aelin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Thank you, Ethan. I haven't felt safe like this in a long time. It means more than I can say." They went to their separate rooms, but sleep did not come easily. Both were aware that Aelin's past could return at any moment, and the peace of the day was only temporary. Yet there was also a sense of hope, a realization that they could face whatever came together, that the bond formed between them in the storm and strengthened through the day was becoming something more enduring. Outside, the stars shone brightly over the plains, silent witnesses to the quiet courage of two people who had found each other in the midst of uncertainty. Inside, the ranch house was warm, alive with the promise of trust, understanding, and the slow unfolding of a story that had only just begun. And so the day ended not with resolution, but with the quiet promise of challenges and revelations yet to come. Ethan and Aylin had survived the storm, built trust, and taken the first steps toward understanding each other. The real test, they both knew, was still ahead, a test that would reveal not only their courage, but the strength of the bond that had begun on a stormy night and had grown stronger with each passing day. The morning air on the ranch was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and fresh grass. Birds flitted across the sky, calling to one another as the sun climbed higher, painting the plains in shades of gold. Ethan rose early, as usual, to check on the animals and the fences, but there was a quiet tension in the back of his mind. He had noticed subtle signs, broken twigs near the edge of the property, footprints that did not belong to him, that suggested someone had been near the ranch in the night. Aylin had been awake as well, moving silently around the kitchen. Her eyes were alert, scanning every corner as she prepared breakfast. She did not speak of what she suspected, but Ethan could see the small signs of unease in her posture, the way her fingers tightened around the mug she held. "Something is not right," she finally said, her voice low. "I felt it last night, even after the storm passed." "Someone has been near the ranch." Ethan set down the pan he had been cleaning. "You think it's the people you mentioned before?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm.
Aylin nodded. "It's possible. I don't know for sure, but I've learned to trust my instincts."
"If they are coming, we need to be ready." Ethan took a deep breath. For years he had lived a quiet life, isolated but safe. Danger had seemed distant, something that belonged to the stories of the past. But now, standing in the warm light of the morning, he realized that his peaceful world could be disrupted at any moment. And he was responsible, not just for himself, but for Aylin as well. They spent the morning preparing. Ethan checked the barn, reinforcing the gates and making sure the animals were secure. Aylin moved with him, her presence calm but alert, offering suggestions that showed her knowledge of survival and self-protection. Together they worked efficiently, moving in silence when needed, speaking only to coordinate their actions. By midday, the ranch was as ready as it could be. Yet the waiting was the hardest part. Ethan could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for movement. Aylin, though composed, occasionally glanced toward the tree line, her hand brushing instinctively against the pocket where she kept a small knife. The stillness of the plains only heightened the anticipation of danger, making each sound, the wind in the grass, the distant call of a bird, feel amplified. Late in the afternoon, a movement caught Aylin's eye. From the edge of the property, near the shadowed line of trees, she spotted figures moving cautiously toward the ranch. Ethan followed her gaze and saw them too. 3 men, their faces shadowed, carrying a purposeful weight in their step.
"They've found us," Aylin whispered. Ethan nodded, steadying himself.
Don't panic. We can handle this." The men approached slowly, their intentions clear, but they did not yet realize that the ranch was defended. Ethan had the advantage of knowing the land, and Aylin had the skill and instinct to act quickly. Together they moved toward the barn, where they could take cover and prepare. As the figures came closer, Aylin stepped forward. "We don't want trouble," she called out, her voice calm but firm. "Leave now and no one will get hurt," one of the men sneered. "You think we came here by accident? We know who you are, girl. We're taking you back, and he won't matter." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No one's taking anyone anywhere. You leave now or you'll regret it." The standoff was tense. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The men hesitated, weighing their options. They had expected to find a lone traveler, vulnerable and easy to capture. Instead, they found a rancher who was calm, confident, and ready, and a woman who moved with the certainty of someone who had survived far more than they could imagine. Aylin stepped slightly forward again, her eyes locked on the leader. "I've survived storms, and I've survived people like you," she said. "Leave. Now. Or we will protect ourselves." The men exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. They had underestimated the pair in front of them, and the thought of confrontation was no longer simple. But stubbornness and pride drove them forward. Ethan moved to position himself between Aylin and the men, his stance steady, hands ready. The land was his advantage. He knew every step, every hidden dip in the ground. He could see the way the men's eyes flicked toward the fence, toward the barn, calculating their approach. Suddenly, one of the men lunged forward. Ethan reacted instantly, blocking the path and using his weight to push the man back. Aylin moved at the same moment, her agility and awareness allowing her to sidestep and disarm another. The confrontation was swift, controlled chaos, each action precise and calculated. Neither Ethan nor Aylin sought unnecessary violence. They only aimed to protect themselves. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. The men, realizing they were outmatched and that the element of surprise had been lost, retreated back toward the trees. Their anger and frustration were clear, but they had learned that the ranch was not an easy target. Ethan and Aylin stood together, breathing heavily, their hearts pounding from the encounter. Neither spoke immediately. The silence was thick with adrenaline and relief. Finally, Ethan said, "Are you hurt?" Aylin shook her head.
No, we were careful. Ethan nodded, glancing around the ranch to ensure everything remained secure.
"They'll be back," he said cautiously. "But now we know. We need to be prepared for anything." Aylin agreed. "I've survived worse," she said. "But you did well."
I'm glad you were here, alone. This would have been much harder.
The rest of the evening was spent reinforcing the ranch even more. Ethan checked the barn again, tightened the doors, and prepared tools for any future encounter. Aylin moved silently, setting small barriers and planning ways to defend the house if needed. Together, they worked efficiently, their trust in one another growing stronger with every action. As night fell, the stars began to appear over the plains, bright and unwavering. Inside, the fire was lit again, casting warmth and light across the small house. They sat together, eating a simple meal, both aware of the events that had unfolded. The danger was not gone, but for the moment they had survived, and they had done it together. Ethan broke the silence. "I never thought I'd face something like this again. I thought my life would be quiet from now on." Aylin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Life doesn't always follow the path we expect, but that doesn't mean it can't be faced. Together, we can handle it." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The bond they had begun to form was no longer just about trust. It was about reliance, understanding, and the shared will to protect one another. Later, as they prepared for bed, Ethan made sure the doors were secure and the windows reinforced. Aylin double-checked the small knife she kept with her, her instincts always alert. Despite the tension, there was a calmness in their actions, a quiet confidence that they could survive whatever came next. Before sleep, Ethan spoke softly. "I know they might come back, but we'll face them if they do. We're stronger than they think." Aylin smiled faintly, a small warmth in her eyes. "We are." Outside, the plains were quiet under the moonlight, the shadows long and mysterious. But inside the ranch there was light, warmth, and a sense of safety built on mutual trust and courage. The events of the day had tested them, but they had proven their resilience, not just against external threats, but against the fear that could have paralyzed them. And so the night ended with vigilance and quiet determination. Ethan and Island knew that challenges were far from over, but they also knew that together they could face the world outside the ranch and the dangers that lurked beyond the tree line. The bond forged through storms, danger, and shared survival was now unbreakable, and it would carry them forward into the unknown days ahead. The morning sun rose slowly over the McCall Ranch, casting a golden glow across the plains. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild grass after the stormy days and tense nights that had passed. Ethan stood outside, looking over the land with a calm sense of satisfaction. The fences were secure, the animals were healthy, and, most importantly, Island was safe. Island appeared beside him, her movements quiet but steady, her eyes taking in the morning light. She had spent the night awake more than once, alert to every sound, but now she allowed herself to breathe, feeling the peace of the early day. "It's calm," she said softly, a hint of relief in her voice. "For now, at least." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, but it's a good kind of calm. One we've earned." The events of the past days had left them both changed. The storm, the arrival at the ranch, and the confrontation with the men from Island's past had all tested them in ways they had not anticipated. Yet, through these challenges, they had discovered a strength in one another that neither had expected. Aylin looked out across the plains, her eyes following the horizon. "I never imagined I would find a place like this," she said quietly. "A home, even a temporary one. But here, it feels different, safe." "Strong?" Ethan nodded. "That's what I hoped for you when I let you in. I didn't know your story, didn't know what danger followed you. I just knew you couldn't be left out in that storm. I'm glad you came." She turned to him, a small smile touching her lips. "I'm glad I did too. You saved me not just from the storm, but from being alone in a world that hasn't always been kind. That matters more than I can say." They spent the morning together, tending to the ranch with a sense of quiet teamwork. The bond between them had deepened, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared survival. Ethan taught Aylin more about the land, how to read the weather, how to notice subtle changes in the animals, and how to maintain the fences that kept the ranch secure. Aylin, in turn, shared her own knowledge, how to move quietly, how to be aware of hidden dangers, and how to survive when the world was unkind. By midday, the work was done, and they paused to rest. Ethan brought out a jug of water and 2 mugs, handing one to Island. She accepted it with a grateful nod, and for a few moments they simply sat, letting the warmth of the sun wash over them. "It's strange," Ethan said after a moment. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, just me and the land. And then you came. And now, I don't want to imagine life without someone to share it with." Aylin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "I know the feeling. I've traveled for so long, always moving, never staying. But here, I feel like I can breathe. Like I can belong, even if only for now." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft sound, a rustle of leaves at the edge of the property. Both turned instinctively, their bodies alert. But it was only a deer stepping cautiously into the clearing before bounding away. The moment reminded them that the world beyond the ranch was still wild, but it also emphasized the peace they had worked to create. As the afternoon passed, Ethan and Aylin continued to work and talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, and their fears. Ethan spoke of Clara, of the life they had shared, and of the quiet grief that had filled the ranch since her passing. Island listened with compassion, offering small words of comfort and understanding. "I can't imagine losing someone like that," she said softly. "But I think love doesn't end. It changes form, but it stays with you. You carry it forward?" Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yes, and sometimes it opens the way for new connections. People you didn't expect, coming into your life when you least anticipate it." Evening approached, and the sky turned shades of orange and pink. The ranch was bathed in a warm, gentle light. Ethan and Island sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. The events of the past days felt distant in the calm of the evening, yet they knew the experiences had shaped them both in profound ways. "You've changed my world," Ethan said quietly. "Not just because of what you've endured, but because of who you are. You brought life back into a place that was quiet for too long." Island reached out, placing her hand lightly on his. "And you've given me safety and trust. That matters more than anything. It's not just a home, it's a place where I can be myself without fear." The stars began to appear, one by one, twinkling over the plains. The night was calm, the wind gentle, and for the first time since her journey began, Aylin allowed herself to relax completely. She knew the challenges might come again, but for now she was safe, and she was not alone. Ethan glanced at her, feeling a sense of peace he had not known in years. The loneliness that had once defined his life was replaced by companionship, understanding, and the quiet joy of shared survival. The ranch, once merely a place of work and memory, had become a sanctuary, not just for the land, but for the hearts of those who lived there. The following days were filled with routine, work, and small moments of connection. Ethan and Island continued to care for the animals, maintain the land, and learn from one another. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Each day brought new understanding, new stories, and new hope for the future. One evening, as they watched the sunset in a blaze of orange and purple, Island spoke again. I think this is what I've been looking for. Not just a place to run to, but a place where I can stay, a place where I belong." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "And you belong here. As long as you want to stay, this is your home too. We'll face whatever comes together." The warmth of the moment was profound, a quiet celebration of survival, courage, and human connection. The storm that had brought Aylin to the ranch, the dangers she had faced, and the challenges of the past days were no longer just memories. They were the foundation of something stronger, something lasting. As night fell, they prepared for rest. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting a soft glow across the rooms. Outside, the plains were quiet, the only sounds the distant calls of animals and the whisper of the wind. Inside, there was safety, warmth, and the comfort of shared presence. Ethan checked the doors and windows, a habit from recent days, but he did so with calm, not fear. Island followed, making sure her belongings were secure, her knife close, but unused. They moved with confidence now, knowing that they could handle challenges together. Before sleep, Ethan spoke softly, almost to himself. I never thought life could bring someone like you into my world, but now that you're here, I can't imagine life without you. Island smiled, a small but radiant expression, and I can't imagine going back to the way things were. Here I am safe and I am alive. With you, I am home. The night passed peacefully. Stars shone brightly over the plains, silent witnesses to the quiet triumph of two lives brought together by chance. courage, and trust. The past storms, both literal and metaphorical, had shaped them, but they had endured and emerged stronger. By morning, the ranch was bathed in sunlight again. The animals stirred, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the world seemed renewed. Ethan and Aylin moved through the day with purpose, tending to the land, sharing small moments of laughter and conversation, and solidifying the bond that had grown through the trials they had faced. They knew that challenges could arise again. The world beyond the ranch was unpredictable, but they also knew that together they could face whatever came. The stormy night that had brought Aylin to Ethan's door had set in motion a journey of trust, courage, and connection. And now, as the sun rose higher, both of them understood that this journey was only the beginning of a life they would share, shaped by the land, the challenges they faced, and the strength they found in one another. And so the story ended not with fear, but with hope, not with loss, but with life. Ethan and Aylin, two people from different worlds, had found each other on a stormy night, and in that meeting, they had discovered not only survival, but belonging, trust, and a quiet love that would guide them through the days ahead. The plains stretched endlessly before them, vast and wild, but within the walls of the ranch, warmth, safety, and companionship had taken root. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. And as they looked toward the horizon together, both knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side.